want to thank John Timmons and Kevin O'Neill one more time. Thank you. So once again, welcome to what has to be our 7th or 8th annual day of poetry, art, and jazz here at Tunxis Community College. And this year, actually by way of background, every year the Connecticut Poetry Circuit, which is organized by our current poet's home college of Manchester Community College, organizes 2 events during the academic year. The first is the Connecticut Poetry Circuit poet, whom they select every year to go to the campuses of the 2- and 4-year colleges in Connecticut reading their poetry. And the second event is actually a student poetry circuit statewide from the 2- and 4-year colleges. Students will be touring the campuses reading their poetry, and that is a juried competition. So we can look forward to that in the spring. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Steve Straight to Tunxis. I've known Steve for many years as an esteemed colleague in the community college system. And just to tell you a little bit about him, Steve is professor of English, and he directs the poetry program at Manchester Community College. His most recent book, once again for sale for the nominal price of $13.95. Poetry is certainly affordable, and he will sign it for you. It came out in 2012. His previous collection, The Water Carrier, was featured on the nationally syndicated radio program, The Writer's Almanac with Garrison Keillor. And for many years, he directed the Connecticut Poetry Circuit. He's also directed the seminar series for the Sunken Garden Poetry Festival. He's given many workshops on teaching and writing throughout the eastern United States and in Ireland. And in 1998, he was named a Distinguished Advocate for the Arts by the Connecticut Commission on the Arts. So before I read what one other esteemed poet has said about Steve Straight, we have some more people coming in. I'd just like to take a moment to thank all the people who make an event like this possible. You may not realize just how many people that is. From Breton Facilities, who sets up the room to exact specifications, to the art faculty who partner with us, and to John and Kevin who partner with us with the music and art, to Carol Mahmood, the humanities chair, who makes sure that we have a budget every year to afford this, to Mike Zish, who is behind the camera today and will make this all available on podcast, to Dr. Addy, our esteemed president in the audience, who makes all of that possible at Tunxis by championing our larger budget to the state legislature, to my colleagues in the humanities department who always support these events, to everyone at the college, like Lisa Lavoie and other people who are on the professional staff who get the word out. Also, our faculty assistant, Rosalie Kavoris, and my close friend and esteemed colleague, Maggie Carlin, in the counseling office made sure the setup was just perfect. So we hope you enjoyed the food and the music and the art. And I think I've not forgotten anyone, and if I did, I'm terribly sorry. I think I've gotten just about everybody. So last but not least, Billy Collins, who is our former Poet Laureate of the United States, says of Steve Straight, Steve Straight is a poet of everyday experience whose disarmingly casual voice can lead the reader into deeper waters of insight and modest epiphanies. Every one of the poems in the Almanac achieves that rare thing in the streets of contemporary poetry. They are just plain interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Straight.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Halloween. I'm sorry, I have no Halloween poems. Sorry. Thanks to Sally. Thanks to everybody. I organize a lot of readings myself, so I know what it takes to organize a reading. It's great to have such wonderful live music. My wife's a professional musician, so I always appreciate getting music. Most of you I don't know. There are a few old friends here and colleagues, but the first poem I'm going to read is the first poem in the new collection. It's called Only Connect, and it's kind of about 2 ideas. One is that a poet is always trying to connect with the audience, trying to figure out, what do I have to say that other people will connect with and associate their own lives with. At the same time, I can't write a poem for people who are only going to be interested in a poem that is directly about a subject matter that they're interested in. A reader has to be a little bit more than that. You have to stretch a little bit more than that. So there's 2 things going on here. So this is Only Connect. Can everybody hear me? Am I close enough to the mic? Okay, I'm seeing my wife, I'm seeing my wife say, louder. Okay, that's great. So this is Only Connect. And it's really a direct address to you if you've just opened the book. Let me pour you a cup of coffee with milk, or without, whatever way you like it. Let me add a piece of toast, though Lord knows I have no idea what kind. Whole wheat, rye, cinnamon swirl, even butter for the toast seems like a risk. It's too dangerous to suggest a jam. Dear reader, I want to connect with you right off, find some common ground, not chance waiting until the final line when our philosophies coalesce like pudding. For I know how tenuous this whole affair is. Me dumping the contents of my consciousness right on your table, wood or mica, and sorting it right in front of you for little acorn tops of truth in among the lint, paper clips, and pennies. I know I've already lost some of you, tea drinkers, orange juicers, bagel mavens, and some of you are hanging on by a thread waiting for Cottage by the Lake, or When My Kids Were in Diapers, or clematis tendrils looping the iron trellis. I know myself, when Heidegger enters the poem, or the musical Cats, the page is half turned right there. And if the poet doesn't swing back to my territory, I have magazines unread beside me, and plenty of old photograph albums to thumb through. I know there is no changing you, reader, that I can only hope to add another flavor, put another song into the rotation. But if I can establish that rapport of like minds, adjust the knob to exactly your frequency, then you might follow me into the dark forest of memory, or onto the carnival ride of hypothesis, or even right off the cliff of surprise. It's a dangerous precedent, because each time you don't applaud after a poem, I'm going to feel so bad. So I think the next two poems will connect with your lives, no matter what, because they're about teachers and students. The first one is from my first book, and it takes place at a time when I had just started teaching. I was at UConn, I was a grad student, I was teaching a class, and I really didn't know if I could be a teacher or not, as you'll hear in the poem. And now it's more than 30 years later, so I guess I was cut out to be a teacher. True story here, everything in here is true, pretty much. It's called At Spike's Garage. At Spike's Garage, near the university, I pull in for gas. It's the olden days, and Ernie, the mechanic, comes out from the bay to pump my gas. I'm in grad school and my second year teaching freshman English, and Ernie's fixed my car a few times at his house to spare me Spike's cut for parts and labor. Ernie, a townie, about 22, bushy-haired with greasy blue coveralls, oil under his nails, locks the pump on and says, "So, Professor, what are you teaching?" It's Friday, and I remember the dazed group I tried to teach that morning, sleepy and hungover, leading a discussion, just one more session, pulling teeth. Hamlet, I tell him. Shakespeare. He stops in mid-squeegee as blue water streams down my window. "Hamlet," he spits. "Ugh, I had to read that in high school. It was awful, so boring." He seems to say what my students only thought, and for a second I wonder if I'm cut out for this, trying to teach great works to people who hate them. "Hamlet," he says again, shaking the squeegee. "He didn't even know when to shit." Finally, he pulls it across the window, wiping the excess liquid off the rubber with his fingers. "Macbeth," he says. Now that was a play. He went on to give me 15 minutes of the best analysis of Macbeth you could ever hope to hear. This guy who was a townie, never going to go to college, but blew me away. And so then in the back of my head, I was thinking, if I can get students like that, then I'll survive. And I have, fortunately. I love my job. I still am very happy to get to class. You have those moments, where you're not really sure if you're connecting or if the class is really going in the right direction. And this poem will describe one of those, alas. I know that there's nobody here who still has their cell phone on. It's just, because I know you're all, good audience members, you would never do that. And I know in a class, even if it were a boring class, you would never check your phone for a text message. It just wouldn't happen. So this is a poem about those other people. It's called Remote. Halfway through my lecture on the secrets to writing a good essay, I realized one of my students in the back row, whose head is angled as if studying his thigh, is actually checking his cell phone for a message, or perhaps even watching a movie. And I see now that many of my students, sullen, passive, and unprepared today, seem really pissed off that the remote control that would change me to a show they like is somehow missing. Are angry no mouse at their fingertips clicks me into hyperspace. Not even a volume control on their desks can mute me as I drone on and on about some product they don't want. Or am I their employer, forcing them to bag my ideas in paper or plastic with a smile, not letting them use the bathroom during this 80-minute sweatshop, this retail prison offering no clear paycheck, no vision of middle-class bliss for which they trade these grindstone days. Or worse, since many are so young, perhaps I'm just a parent, telling them the essay better be home by 11, with plenty of gas in it and no clutter to pick up their run-ons and fragments after themselves. And they listen to me as they stare at the door to the rest of their lives. As I say, it's just a rare bad moment in a wonderful career. My wife and I are big movie fans, and one of us said to the other one time, I can't remember when this happened, but it was a fatal moment. We were looking at a movie, and I think it was a dog we were looking at, and one of us said to the other, that dog doesn't know it's in a movie. As soon as you're onto that, as soon as you see a movie that has an animal in it, and you realize, oh, the dog's not acting, it's just doing tricks for, the trainer off camera or whatever animal it is, and then it's hard to watch a movie that has an animal in it. Because you want to believe it's acting, but it's not. There's a couple things I should point out in here. Got people who are maybe a year or two younger than me here. So you may not have heard of the old television show called Lassie. There were movies as well, but there was an old show called Lassie about a collie, wicked smart, and the collie had its buddy Timmy, and the mother on the show was played by June Lockhart. The deal was that every episode, Timmy would get into danger, into trouble. He'd fall down a well, or get his leg caught in a bear trap, something like that. And Lassie would see this and go running home, go up to June Lockhart, barking until she got it. Why she didn't figure it out every episode, we don't know. But Lassie's trainer was called Rudd Weatherwax, famous Hollywood trainer, trained a lot of dogs. So he shows up in the poem too. And it's called The Horse Does Not Know It Is in a Movie. The horse does not know it is in a movie, I am sometimes reminded, especially in a close-up, when all the other characters are removed from the shot. It's just a horse eating hay, oblivious to the gaffers and best boys and bright lights outside its stall. Not Pie, the horse that wins the Grand National with Elizabeth Taylor astride, but probably named Sam, or Big Red, a little annoyed by all the fuss until the hay arrived. Nor did any of the lassies know that they were television stars, I have to remember. The audience at home, hanging on every cocked ear, every suddenly rigid stance when Timmy was in danger, waiting for June Lockhart to say again,
"What is it, girl?"
it wasn't anything, except a young collie playing that game again, doing those tricks for Rudd Weatherwax, attentive to his tics and hand signals as he stood off camera with a treat. Now that I think of it, those cows I saw on top of the cliffs of Moore in County Clare have no idea they are Irish cows. Characters in the long-running, bumpy play called Ireland have no notion of religion or history or any of our powers to name and distort the world. They only ruminate on the sacrament of grass. If I'm perfectly honest about it, most days I do not know that I am on a stage. Do not notice my weather wax in the wings. Raise one finger to arouse that memory from my childhood. Or wag his left foot to bring that scowl of recurring anxiety to my face. Or summon that metaphor by cocking his head to the right. Most of the time, I think I'm just a man who comes up with these things all on his own. That was my wife, by the way, who gets that line. Because she says, "What is it, girl? So much better." You missed your chance, though, because when she's not at the reading, I get the audience to say the line, and we practice, we rehearse. What is it, girl? I'm sure most of us have some quirky ability that even our friends don't really know that we have. You know, there's something you can do. You know, you can curl your tongue, or you can wiggle your ears, or something like that. I can catch flies. I'm available for parties, by the way. If there's a fly in the room and you want me to catch it, I could probably catch it. And after I read the poem, you too will have that ability because it's an instruction manual on how to catch a fly. Since I'm a poet, it's an opportunity to talk about other stuff too, but it's basically an instruction manual about how to catch a fly. Called, surprisingly, How to Catch a Fly. Wait until the fly is still, preferably on a surface with space on either side of it, as we all would like to exist. Even better if it is occupied with its fly yoga, passing one leg over its head and then another. Now bring your hand up gradually behind the fly and pause. Do not try to catch the fly where it is, or you will catch a perfect handful of air. You must catch the fly where it will be, the future fly, the fly 1 second from now. This is one lesson of desire. So then, when you are ready, sometimes the fly will sense this and stop all motion. Swoop your hand over the fly in one clean motion, ending with a gently closed fist in the air with thumb on top. Then feel the fly buzz inside against the walls. Appreciate, for a moment, the co-evolutionary arc that all of natural history has conspired to achieve this intersection of species. A sigh here is optional. At this point, you might surprise a yawning friend, or roll the fly on the counter like dice, but better to open a door or window and release the fly back into the present, into the cool night air. We have two amazing cats right now, Mikey and Molly. I hear there's a TV show after them, but we named them before the show came out. And they're really incredible cats. And I was up late watching the World Series last night, and I got up a little late today, and the cats were both asleep on top of me, not begging for food, even though it was more than an hour after they usually get fed, not crying, not scratching me, nothing, amazing cats. So this was reminding me of a couple of cat poems. I probably shouldn't have told you that the first poem was a cat poem because it's revealed in the first stanza, but since you're hearing it and most of you are not reading it, It'll make more sense that way. This actually happened, probably you have a friend like this, but I have a friend who is occasionally up to no good, and I don't really, a little sketchy sometimes his behavior in the world. And one day I got a call and he said, Steve, I need you for about half an hour. I'm thinking, are we committing a crime? What are we doing? Are we getting revenge on somebody? And it turned out to be something much nicer, or sadder, but better than being illegal. And this is called General Lee, and it's for Jim LaPenta, my old buddy. We buried General Lee in a shallow grave at the edge of a cornfield on a commanding hill, wrapped in a Confederate flag once stolen from a store in Pennsylvania. We covered the grave with a flagstone slab the shape of Virginia. We drank a beer, talked about Little Tennessee, Shiloh, Purple Haze, and other cats we've known. A breeze changed the shadows around us. I couldn't help recalling the night I buried Rough Edges, an old stray who'd taken to lounging atop my woodpile under the slanted roof out back, who died in his sleep one day on a scrap of yellow carpet I'd put there to cushion his hard life. I couldn't find a shovel, and it took 2 hours in a steady drizzle to dig a good grave with my garden trowel in the rocky soil down by the Mount Hope River. A cat deserves a good grave. I told my friend not to blame himself for General Lee's demise, that he'd had to move somewhere, and cats get hit. He thanked me for the stone and my time, and I went home to nuzzle the fur of the best cat I ever had, who absorbed my affections without another thought. The idea, of course, is that the cat is never thinking about death. It's us, we're projecting it. The cat, a cat's probably capable of feeling grief if, a companion cat dies, but the cat is never thinking about death the way we kind of do. So the cat, I'm thinking about death as I pet my living cat, worried about it after burying my friend's cat. And so this is kind of a companion poem called Grief, and it's about after that cat did die, but lived to be 19. That's pretty good for a cat. Had a great life, Cosmo. So this is called Grief. I've got these 2 cat poems, and I know this is for the cat lovers out there, but really all animal lovers. I have a good dog poem, but you're going to have to buy the book to get that one. Grief. Having known grief before, I expected the heaviness in the chest, the low, slow, shallow breaths you notice before the long inhalation and the sigh, so needed. I expected the ghosts, her curled in a ball against the arm of the love seat for a second, the flash of her striped rump and tail disappearing through a doorway. And in the mathematics of the house with an indoor cat, the absence of her in the rooms downstairs meant the presence of her elsewhere. So as I climbed the stairs and realized she is not stretched out on the northwest corner of the bed to catch the afternoon sun, or on my soft desk chair expecting me, it jars. There is a dizziness. But after 18 years of this deepening consonance, the surprise I feel most is in the texture of her spotted belly fur, the chin slowly rotating against my scratching fingers, the simple heft of her as the vacant claws knead my shoulder through a flannel shirt, all still so present in my aching cells. I mean, it's kind of a simple poem, and I was wondering, should I even include it or not? But people who've read the book, they keep coming up to me and say, oh, that poem, Grief, so sometimes the simple idea is worth writing about. It doesn't have to be fancy. So this is a little bit greater grief, you could say. I thought this was a weird idea, this poem, and I thought nobody else has these ideas but me. And now that I've given readings, people keep coming up to me and say, "Oh no, I have thoughts like that. Don't think you're the only one." This is called the news. I step out of the grocery store with my milk and juice, some ripe bananas, a home magazine for my wife, and walk back to my car as others pass me with their lists, their intentions and duties. And the thought comes from nowhere again that the news could be waiting for me like a coiled snake, that my wife has suddenly died. I'm the last person on earth without a cell phone, so it may be a while before I find out. I may fill the car with gas, not knowing. May wait at a red light, not knowing. Buy strawberries at the stand, still asleep in life's quotidian trance. Traveling without irony as I plan our dinner together, pouring the wine in my mind, nestling with her on our red couch, settling in for a movie or the game. It won't take as long as it did for the sailor stepping off the ship in a distant port after 1,000 miles at sea, or the settler building a house at the edge of the wilderness, the news arriving weeks or even months after the awful event, in a crumpled envelope lifted from a black leather sack. But it will come soon enough as I turn onto our street and see way down the flashing lights in front of what I pray is not our house. Or perhaps not until I reach the house and see the blinking phone machine for the last time without dread. I have tried changing the subject or pretending the thought isn't there, but we exist at the mercy of our imaginations, which know not what they do, and so it is no use. The thought knocks, and I must answer. Allow the thing in, its reality assuming form and dimension as my heartbeat quickens, purpose and meaning sucked with me into the whirlpool of grief from which I know there will be no return. The news is so huge I can only take in a tiny part of it, thank God. And now, stopped in traffic, I turn my face to the sun, imagine that it has gone out, and that in 8 minutes that news will reach the earth. Enough time for me to bask in the sun's wisdom contained in these strawberries, this cloth seat, these fingers gripping the wheel, even that truck moving out of my path as I rush home. That poem's a lot easier to read when my wife is in the audience, because if she's not here, I'm thinking, that would be a terrible coincidence. I have a friend, I read a lot in literature classes at my college, Manchester Community College. It's great to be in another community college, let me say. It's great. Because I know this audience. I know the mixture of people and how great a community college is. I have a friend, and for a while I was reading from my first book, but I would bring copies of poems from the new book to try them out for his class. And one day I brought the news, and after class he said, "Don't bring that poem again." I don't want to have that thought in my head. Just don't bring that poem again. The next idea just kind of hit me. I was in the back of a bus in Chicago, and this thought came to me. I saw this weird guy on the bus that I'll describe, and then it just hit me, oh, something else could be happening here. This is called Scout. From the back of the Chicago city bus, I study a man up front on the bench seat, facing the opposite side. Fat, perhaps 40, legs slightly splayed. He keeps rubbing the fuzz on his skull, eyeing each person who enters with a kind of intensity that makes women avoid him, even change their seats at the next stop. There's no violence in his actions, merely a compelling oddness. And I can't help thinking, what a perfect disguise for Jesus. He's come to take the pulse of our humanity, to see how much we've progressed in 2 millennia, and if it's worth a second trip. He's the advanced scout for himself, out on a reconnaissance of the spirit, armed with the absence of money, style, or charm. I see other candidates almost every day. The Down syndrome kid who tries to hug strangers. The goofy bagger at the grocery store who taxes everyone's patience with his friendly chatter. The war veteran outside the Art Institute crying softly from his wheelchair, "Help me, help me." Probably he is also the cranky woman confined to her bed. The man with the accent asking directions when we're in a rush. Perhaps even the mangy stray mutt nosing through the trash who looks up, curious about our intentions, suggesting grace in his own little way. Somebody's following along with the book, and she just noticed that I changed one word. The original line is, perhaps even the mangy stray mutt poking through the trash, which works, but if you think about it, and as I thought about it after the darn book was published, nosing, that's what dogs do, they nose through the trash. So I've changed one word. I've changed one word in the previous book to it. I mentioned a 3-car garage, and I realized there were no 3-car garages when I was describing that time frame. 2-car garage. So. I once saw a reading, actually, that Gary Snyder, the great poet, did. He wrote a book called Mountains and Rivers Without End, and he spent 40 years writing this group of poems, revising constantly. And he read at UConn, and the book had just come out, and I went to see him, and I bought the book before the reading, and he read almost the entire book. And almost every poem had more changes. After 40 years, I went up and got my book signed, and I said, "Mr. Snyder, really still changing the poems after 40 years?" He says, "Oh, it's not done. They're never done." So I guess I can change 2 words then. Okay, this is a more fun poem. We'll give you a fun poem. I worked at a camp in Maine back in 1970. And it was an interesting camp, to say the least. By day, what we did was we bussed in poor kids from the area towns, and they had a day camp, and we were the counselors for them. And at night, we kind of had the camp to ourselves. I was from Connecticut, grew up in Manchester, and a lot of the other counselors were from New York City. And they were kind of, this is 1970, turmoil, protests, thoughts of revolution against the government and stuff. And they thought of themselves as junior Black Panthers. And if you're not familiar with the Black Panther Party, it was primarily in the 60s and 70s, a little longer. And they were revolutionaries. They wanted to overthrow the government with force, if necessary, to create a different kind of world. And they also did other things. They ran daycare centers and after-school programs for kids. So it was a real mixture of, hardcore revolutionaries who did commit crimes, and then this other side that wanted to help the community. So these kids from New York City considered themselves junior Black Panthers, like Cub Scouts who want to become Boy Scouts. So this is honorary junior Black Panther. Summer 1970. That's 2 parts. 1. The revolution starts tonight, he growled into the back of my head, having jumped and pinned me to the ground just before midnight, rubbing my face in the dirt. I responded, as anyone in my situation might. "Victor, get off me." "Who's this Victor?" he grunted, and I realized then he was trying to disguise his voice. It might seem surprising that the revolution, with capital R, would begin just outside the latrine at a summer camp in the Maine woods. But to Victor and his friends, refugees from the city, with capital C, by day just other junior counselors to poor kids bussed in from Gardner and Hollowall. By night, junior Black Panthers with power salutes and ongoing rhetoric jousts about Bobby and Huey and overthrowing the state. We heard as we passed their cabin. It made perfect sense. Victor saw through my long-haired protest the war facade, his trained eyes revealing what I was, a privileged, white, suburban Connecticut rat. It was practice, of course, guerrilla war games, with slim pickings for potential victims out in the middle of nowhere. And after a while, trading the same lines of dialogue back and forth, he let me up. It might seem that at age 15, I played a small role in the dominant, oppressive power structure of the United States, but I guess you have to start somewhere. 2. At Camp Ridgeway, we boarded an old school bus each week for our only excursion into civilization, laundry, at a little strip mall in Augusta. While it agitated, in 2s and 4s we roamed the aisles of the Zaire department store next door, our mixed races, long hair, and hippie clothes a magnet with the plain-clothed but obvious security guards in their nearly matching green plaid shirts who followed us up and down the aisles, tossing one odd item from each department into their carriages: a toaster, argyle socks, a lawn chair. One week, waiting for a friend at the checkout, I witnessed the assembled clerks, mostly bored high school girls, snickering and pointing at an odd-looking couple who left the store embarrassed and obviously hurt. Righteousness possessed me, and I stepped up to the ringleader. "That was a bastard thing to do," I said, and harangued her as I clicked staples from her stapler as if emptying bullets from a chamber. Apparently, the men in plaid saw this, and after we all got back to the laundromat, within minutes the real police arrived, aiming to stamp out this insurrection before it spread, the gung-ho sergeant drawling with a jarring southern accent, "You know I ought to arrest you, young man." After 20 minutes of circular, fruitless interrogation as the last of our tie-dyed shirts and frayed jeans finished their spin cycle behind me, they banned me from Zaire, one of the great disappointments of my life. Back on the bus for the ride back to camp, my fellow counselors reveling in my brush with a man who should come striding down the aisle but Victor, his wild ringlets dancing on his shoulders. He stopped in front of me, slapped me a soul handshake, and said, "Way to go, bro," as if pinning on me a merit badge for valor. All right, I'll read 2 more. This is a poem about hitchhiking cross-country. You hardly ever see hitchhikers anymore, but back in the day, there were more hitchhikers. And when I graduated from UConn in 1980, I hitchhiked around the country for 9,000 miles. First with a buddy halfway, and then on my own from Oakland, California back. It was amazing. It was the best 6-week class I ever took. I learned so much about people. People were so sweet, always take you out of your way. Only a couple of them had guns, you know. It wasn't too scary. Occasionally it was scary. One of the guys who had a gun turned out to be a really nice guy, and we went to happy hour at a bar called Winos, Dingbats, and Riff Raff in Oregon. 5-cent beers at happy hour. Amazing. And he was one of the guys with a gun. So this is another one of those hitchhiking stories, and this is when I was with my friend. We're hitchhiking across the desert on the way to Las Vegas. And this is pretty much just what happened. I didn't write much down. I didn't keep a diary when I was hitchhiking, but I took notes on this one thing because it was so strange. So this is called Panning, June 1st, 1980. Happy to get any ride across the Mojave Desert. My friend and I tossed our packs into the back of the pickup truck and rode the waves of highway from Flagstaff to Vegas, fried by the wind and sun and the high, thin air. The truck bed was filled with a couple's meager belongings collected in garbage bags we used for pillows, and a carton of old milk rotting in the sun. On stops for gas and once for a flat tire, we learned their story. Gerald, with bad teeth and bare feet and long, dirty fingernails, wearing a silver bowl pendant, had lost his job in Texas, but was full of his plan to move to Oregon, to pan for gold and shoot porcupines for money. He said, $1 a head and you can kill 200 in a night. They had already hocked their TV and chairs for gas money, and now were down to a laundry sack of coins they'd saved to play the penny and nickel slot machines in Nevada. He said all of it brightly, but with a twist in his eye that made us wonder once when they stopped at a gas station but didn't get out, just stopped, if the plan included my friend and me jumping out together to use the bathroom and never seeing our packs again, or if the knife in the sheath strapped to his thigh was more than a cowboy prop. Late in the ride, late in the story, as we passed by towns named Chloride and Grasshopper Junction, mostly scrub as far as the eye could see, as our transient family chugged toward the sights of the Hoover Dam, the woman rapped on the thin window separating us and pointed down into the trash below us, smiling. We rooted around for anything of value or meaning until my friend held up a box of Pampers. She smiled and nodded. And as he passed one around to her window at 60 miles an hour, it dawned on us that all along on the front seat had been a tiny baby, gurgling its trust in their great adventure. God knows where they are, you know? Okay, I'm going to close with this poem. I'm sorry to be an English teacher, but it's a poem about punctuation. Sorry. It's okay. I'm going to mention most of the pieces of punctuation here, and it's an effort to try to figure out life using punctuation, or how punctuation might inform that. And it begins with a description of a banner that I saw once that really inspired the poem, and it's, "Do not place a period where God has placed a comma." A great line. It was outside a church in South Windsor. It was attributed on the poster to Gracie Allen, the comedian of the 30s and 40s, but really it was said to people who were about to cross the Atlantic to the New World, who were firm believers, and you're entering scary times here, you don't know what's on the other side of the ocean, so do not place a period where God has placed a comma. Probably had a lot more meaning to them. So punctuation. Seeing the giant banner in front of the church, I think of all the punctuation marks that litter the field of my mind. Commas, yes, indicating that life goes on, or must, and I might make some sense of it around the next bend. Semicolons, winking between endless pairs of diametrical truths that cancel each other out. Ellipses, to represent all the things I used to know, but now I can't recall. Quotation marks, as I try to enlist the wisdom of others. The dash, for all life's punchlines and surprises, yes, but more often in a pair, just loud parentheses forever qualifying some point that others find so clear. The apostrophe, for all I possess, or taking the place of all I no longer need. The teasing caret, more information has just arrived, sir. The colon, promising that what comes next will follow what has come before. Only a myth. The dots more often like the edge of a cliff. And sometimes, just when I think I have life figured out, have found some great truth, there is the asterisk, noting the exception or the flaw. And so perhaps it all comes down to the question mark, that shepherd's crook that grazes all my doubts and fears on hillsides studded with rocks. But in among the flock, curiosity as well, the greatest impulse after love. And by its side, hope that the exclamation point will come. Thank you.
I want to allow a few minutes for Q&A, so if you have any questions for the poet, please don't be shy.
Shout them out. Come on, I'm ready. Sir. How do you start writing a poem, or you get an idea for a poem? Some of these are things from my life that I know I should write about. My first book has a poem about coming home from Maine to find out the guy who was house sitting for us was dressed as a woman and wanted to become a woman. You know, you got to write that down, right? You know, the poem kind of writes itself. And sometimes I'll just get an idea from the news even or something like that. I mean, when I saw the odd guy in the bus, it just struck me, that could be Jesus. You know, it's an odd thought, but oh, well, therefore I have a poem. And I think when you have the idea, you don't know if it's going to be any good or not, but you just try to, first I try to brainstorm what are the possibilities of this idea or this thought, and then I just see if maybe there's a poem forming, and then I'll just pursue the idea. Okay, well, if this means this, then what follows that? I have a friend who says he always knows what the ending of his poem is before he starts it. That is just so foreign to me, I can't even handle that idea. He's a very good poet, but I just can't imagine having the ending first. So I'm trying to figure stuff out. And so if you get into something, it could be short story as well, or play. If you're trying to figure something out, and you start with a little idea, well, that gives you direction.
What are some ways you should go out and write words and how to connect the right?
Oh, the hard part. How do you choose the right words and how do you connect everything? You practice. You know, it's like any kind of thing you never could do before. If you've never played guitar, you know, how do you know the fingering and chords and stuff? And you practice. How do you write music? Well, you try out different chords and variations, and then that sounds good, and you pursue it. And so you just keep writing. And it's really instinctual. And at a certain point, your instincts have improved. So like now I know when a poem is done. Now, most of the time, I know when a line sucks. Still, when I write my first draft, I can guarantee the last line is going to be terrible. The last line is going to be where I say, okay, did you get it, reader? Let me hit you over the head with the meaning of the poem. Let me take out this 2x4 and just smack you with the meaning. And so that's the first line that gets crossed out. Second draft, I look at that and go, oh my God, how could that be in the poem? So. Others? So sweet. You must have a question, sir.
As you're thinking of working on the poem, do you consciously choose structure, or do you just do you ever make a decision? I'm going to do a something, right? Anything like that?
Yeah, I rarely make a decision I'm going to do a sonnet because I don't write many sonnets. But you get ideas that are pretty close to a sonnet. That structure. I think structure is pretty late for me. I'll write long lines and pay no attention to where the lines might be broken, so I don't know if I have short lines or long lines yet. Because I might do that too early, and then I realize, oh, I've got to cut half this line. Oh, that ruins the whole stanza. So that comes late. Favorite poem of mine is Eamon Grennan, and I asked him for a draft once of a poem, and the poem is about 35 lines long, and his draft was 8 single-space pages that looked like, you know, text out to the margins. And from 8 single-space pages, he ended up with this 35-line poem. And you could see pieces of the lines and everything, but the idea was get it all down. There might be something of value, and you might figure it out. So structure comes really late for me in most poems. Some are easier, shorter poems, and they say, okay, this poem is meant to dance down the page. Sally?
I'm interested in, we talk in class, of course, but even as a writer, I'm interested in the issue of sound and how much you read aloud to yourself for the sound elements, because I'm noticing the word choice and obviously the way that some of the sounds work in your poetry.
Yeah, it's a good question. Questions about sound, paying attention to sound. I don't have many poems that rhyme or have regular meter. Those would be the classic uses of sound that you'd see in a lot of poems. And some people say, you know, it's what makes that a poem? It's like you're writing prose or whatever. But if you saw the drafts, you'd see there's a lot of attention paid to the rhythm of a line, the sound of 2 words together, the sound of a word at the end of a line is crucial. You know, whether I've got 3 one-syllable words at the end for an effect or whatever. So I'm really conscious of sound.
Read out loud.
I read out loud. You have to read it out loud. My poor wife hears all my poems early. She used to say that she didn't know anything about poetry. Now that she's been going to poetry readings with me for 20 years and read a lot of poetry, now she's perfectly capable of saying, that's no good, Steve. The title of the new book was going to be The Flag of Cucumber, which is another poem, and she just said, no. That's not the title. She was right. And then I got The Almanac out of it, another poem, and then Our daughter actually did the cover. She's a professional book designer. It's nice to have one in your family. And she just quizzed me about poems and stuff, and then came up with drafts of covers. Yeah. Anybody else? You're on.
You talked about, you've alluded to some aspects of your writing, not necessarily. Well, actually, you talked about thought, for example. We don't control for all thoughts. I think it occurred to me that some things you said kind of indicate that there's an element of some of your writing which might be beyond your control.
Yes.
Have you experienced instances of automatic writing, something taking over?
Interesting.
If you're done with a moment, what just happened?
The setup to the question was that you notice that in some of my poems there are references to, I don't know where these thoughts come from, the red weather wax off stage. What causes that memory that you have to come back, that you haven't thought of in years and years and years? What? It might as well be somebody off stage, with a little nudge for you. And he asked if I ever experienced automatic writing, which is when you're writing and you're not really conscious of what you're writing. And I would say it probably has happened in poems, but because of the form that's small, I think it's less so, although I have poems I say I can hardly remember writing that. That's a form of that. The biggest time that ever happened to me was I was in a class at UConn, and the professor gave us a chance to write a short story instead of a formal essay. And I spent all semester thinking about this short story, and it was going to be a Kafka-like story about somebody at UConn who tries to drop a course after the at-drop deadline, which was nearly impossible at UConn. You go to 5 offices, you need 6 signatures, and that's not enough. So I worked on that, notes for that all semester, and then, it's due tomorrow. I haven't started writing it. So I got a big cup of coffee, started at 8 at night, and I wrote until 8 in the morning. Hardly changed a word, and it's probably the best piece of fiction I ever wrote. And I really have no memory of writing it. So that's pretty darn close. I mean, I thought of it all semester, but then it just kind of, somebody gave me that story. So.
Because I have a question. As a professor, I teach philosophy and I also teach poetry. And while I've had students who joke that, I have students philosophy, the creative writing class on Wednesday night and it's a philosophy class Thursday morning. I don't wish that on anyone.
Oh, it's a perfect combination.
But his statement was that it's the same class, which he was being very facetious about. They're very different classes. And so, I think about this sometimes, I'm very much in that super logical kind of mode other times, something like a tornado. So I'm just conscious of that for myself as an artist, that those are very different registers that I'm in.
Yeah.
So,
I don't find any difference between creative writing and philosophy. It's all exploring the same. For me, it's exploring the same idea. I'm trying to figure out the world. I'm trying to figure out why it works the way it does, why people are the way they are. Anything that goes with that. And what is that but philosophy? That they're the same thing to me.
Enormous overlap with you.
Enormous overlap.
I'm just interested in those kinds of gears that we can be in sometimes.
Yeah, if I'm in the gear where I'm plodding along and I'm really trying to carefully choose the next word, that's probably not going to create very good poetry. I have to be a little bit in the tornado side, let it come a little bit easier. Later on, maybe in the editing process, I can get that, that anal retentive guy to come in and look at that word and say, no, that's a terrible word. Have you looked that up lately? One last question. You're on. Use any word I know. So if it's an older word that somebody else might have to look up that works perfectly, I'd be willing to use it. But I'm never trying to confuse the reader. I'm always trying to make it clear. I think the biggest risk in poetry is when poets are perfectly clear about everything they say and the poem's still good. I mean, it's easy to write a poem that's filled with riddle or, you're barely touching on meaning at times or whatever, and it's so clever. I hate those poems. To me, those are called bad poems. There are difficult poems that you have to work your way through, but the first reading should give you some interest in the poem and some connection, at least to the ideas. But the poem that's deliberately trying to confuse you or that can't be deciphered, that's a bad poem. You can find them every other week in the New Yorker magazine, by the way. The most prestigious place of all to publish your poem. Many bad poems published every other week. Or mediocre poems by famous poets. That's another category the New Yorker has. Frustrates poets around the country.
They should tell us anyway, right?
Yeah.
That's mediocre.
Did you have a question?
I did. I noticed that you deal with a lot of serious topics in your poetry, but you have such a humorous outlook often in your poems. And I was just wondering, what impulse is it that begins the poetry? Does it often begin with a serious contemplation, or does it sort of begin with a humorous look at the world?
I don't think I'm conscious of that at all. It's whatever I am, that's going into the poem. I guess that's not totally true. I'm working on a poem. I actually was in a class, teaching class yesterday. There are great discoveries of how many particles form who we are. There are 100 trillion bacteria in just our intestines. We're more bacteria than we are anything else, practically. And that's a great subject. I love science. Most poets do, and I want to write about that. And so I struggled for a long time, how do I get into this subject? And I think I got it in this class yesterday, and it seems like it'll be funny. It's going to be a committee meeting, and I'm running the committee, and I'm talking to all the bacteria. Want to say goodbye to those 8,000 of us we lost this morning when I brushed my hair, Really sorry about the overdose of jalapeno, tossing and turning. I realize some of you really didn't appreciate that, So I guess it'll be funny, but it's a serious subject.
Yeah.
You've had enough. Thank you very much for coming. Being so serious.